just can't allow this kind of hatred and anti-Semitism to flourish on our campuses, and it must be stopped in its tracks. Those who are perpetrating this violence should be arrested.
Hey everybody, I'm Brian Enton filling in for Chris Cuomo tonight. That was Speaker of the House Mike Johnson on the campus of Columbia University earlier today, addressing the conflict that is now dividing our campuses. Protests at colleges, they've been spreading across the country. We see it every day. It's causing outrage. There's been arrests. There's been even more division. And today we got a reminder of how all of this started. October 7th, when Hamas brutally attacked Israel and kidnapped more than 250 hostages. At least 129 of them are still being held today, including American citizens. And one of those is 24-year-old Israel-American Hirsch Goldberg Polin. Chris spoke with Hirsch's parents several times, both in Israel and most recently here in New York, to mark his 6 months in captivity. Take a look.
What has been the hardest part so far?
Picture your mother and picture her knowing that you're either dead or kidnapped without an arm. That's how I'm doing. That's how we're doing. We want our child back. We want our only son back.
The single most important thing that could happen to kind of release tension from that region is get these hostages home.
Well, today their biggest fear was relieved. Their son Hirsch is presumably still alive. The reason we know that is because Hamas released a hostage video of Hirsch in captivity. And we're only going to show you a still from the video, which is what you're looking at, because we're not going to show Hamas propaganda videos. But you can see that even though Hirsch has been injured, losing part of his left arm to a grenade during the attack on October 7th, he is presumably alive. Here is a statement his parents, Rachel and John, released after they saw that video.
Hirsch, if you can hear this, we heard your voice today for the first time in 201 days. And if you can hear us, I am telling you, we are telling you, we love you, stay strong, survive.
Just imagine what those parents are going through. The image of Hirsch, a young man in his prime with his whole life ahead of him, held hostage for over 200 days, sorely in need of medical attention. It is a stark reminder of what instigated the conflict that we now see raging on our college campuses. As the chaos on campuses is now spreading across the country, we have to ask, how is our government handling the protests? Let's bring in now Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz and also NewsNation correspondent at large, Geraldo Rivera. Geraldo, I want to start with you. Why does it feel like no one cares about these hostages anymore, Geraldo? You know, I was out at Columbia. We see the video every day from the campuses. No one talks about the hostages. It's like everybody's just forgotten about it.
You know, I don't know that people have forgotten. I mean, maybe it's not top of mind. Maybe it's not leading the news. There's so many things competing for center stage in the world of news that sometimes we do lose focus. But the release of the video with Hirsch, having watched the family with Chris, you got to know the parents. They are the most effective speakers. Their relief in his being alive is so palpable that no parent could not feel deeply, deeply moved by it. In terms of the connection between the protesters and what's happening with this young man, I think these are separate stories right now. Right now, let's rejoice that we have proof of life, that this young man who was mangled by a Hamas grenade on October 7th and thrown into the back of a pickup truck with no medical attention has somehow miraculously survived. So rather than take this as a defeat or, remember everything awful that's happened, take him and his survival as a beacon of hope for the other 130-odd civilians that are being held by Hamas, and indeed to the women and children and innocent men in Gaza, that this damn thing will end, that this will be over, that separate these two sides and let them let them try to patch some kind of coexistence, because what's the point of this grinding, of this mayhem, of this murder? It's just horrible. But at least this is a one ray. Let us celebrate this. You could talk about the hostages, talk about the demonstrators, and talk about the military aid, this or that. But just look at him. He's alive, having survived a grenade attack. Yeah. And that, I think, is what I, as a parent, am going to focus on, at least tonight.
It's hard not to, your heart goes out to those parents. But Professor Dershowitz, do you really believe that these are two separate stories, like Geraldo does?
Absolutely not.
Because none of the protesters are talking about the hostages. It feels like no one's talking about the hostages.
Because we don't understand that this doesn't involve only Israelis or Israeli Americans. It's coming to a theater near you. Let me tell you, Geraldo and I are old enough to remember the late 1960s and early 1970s. I represented some of the anti-Vietnam War demonstrators who turned from protesters into terrorists. They killed policemen. They planted bombs in the University of Wisconsin. They tried to blow up a recruitment center. That's going to happen here. These kids, these protesters, these people who are shouting, "We are Hamas, rape is resistance, we pray for Hamas rockets," they're going to join Hamas. When Hamas comes to America, as it will, as it's come to Europe, and says to some of them, "Help us, find a synagogue that isn't guarded. Find a movie theater that we can get into. Help us blow up people, not only Jews, but others as well." I guarantee you there are some people, not maybe on the campuses themselves, but the outside agitators, the ones who are crying for Hamas and hoping for Hamas and rooting for Hamas. The line between advocacy, incitement, and joining can be very, very narrow. I knew Kathy Boudin as a student. I knew her as a protester. And then she became a murderer. And she helped kill 2 policemen in Rockland County. Then what happened to her? She got pardoned. And who do you think hired her to teach students? Columbia. She probably taught some of these students. We have glorified some of the terrorists. Movies have been made about them from the 1960s and the 1970s. There are going to be terrorists among these people. They're going to join with Hamas, and they're going to be blowing up places near you. They're coming to a theater and a synagogue near you, and we have to be concerned about that. This is not only about hostages. This is not only about Gaza. This is about Brooklyn. This is about Chicago. This is about Dearborn. This is about Los Angeles. We have to be deeply concerned about what these young people will turn into, the way the protesters turned into weathermen, Weather Underground, and tried to destroy America.
Whoa.
Many of these people are not interested in the Palestinians. They're interested in destroying America. Let's not understate this. Our own lives are at stake here. If Hamas is not destroyed in Gaza, they're coming to a theater near you, just the way they're coming to Europe. This is the beginning, not the end. You heard my warning. Put me back on television in a year from now and say, you wish I weren't right, but you recognize I was right.
I see you itching to say something, Geraldo. I mean, is it fair to paint all these protesters with such a broad stroke?
I didn't say all. I said some. Maybe 50, maybe 100, maybe 20.
As Professor Dershowitz knows very well, because he knows her, I have a wonderful college-bound high school senior, a proud Jewish woman. She's going off to a big school.
Wonderful woman, Saul.
I am absolutely, and you were there for her learning her bat mitzvah.
Right.
These kids have a right to be active. They have a right to be emotionally involved. They have a right to speak out under the First Amendment. This is not George Floyd. This is not the picture the professor paints of this malignancy. I don't buy it. We haven't had that.
I talked about
George Floyd was horrible.
Agitators.
Going back to Vietnam.
Yeah, but Geraldo, I mean, they've shut down the camp. They shut down Columbia. They shut down the college campus there's no classes. I mean, isn't that where it crosses the line that they've occupied the campus into their own little city?
Come on, Brian. This is Gen Z. They're finally out of the basement. Let them have a moment. I don't know that anyone's been seriously injured. I'm troubled by the mask.
We're not talking about your daughter.
But Alan, maybe we'll be invaded by space. I mean, it's.
No, that's what they
you're
said.
Doing is you're stirring.
Come back and play this.
You are stirring disquiet.
Play this again in a year from now.
I will. I'll come back a year later.
Yes, I am. I am
if you and I
trying to
are
warn
still
people about what's going to happen. Yeah. I'm warning people the way people
in
Germany,
be prudent.
People in the 1930s.
What I am concerned mostly about is the safety of my child. And moving forward, I think that the United States has done all, and I'm sure Brian will bring it up, can be reasonably expected. $26 billion today in military and other aid.
I want to get to Professor Dershowitz's his op-ed in the Washington Post. You recently wrote this opinion piece. I'm sorry, the Wall Street Journal, where you compared Biden's reaction to the protesters to Trump's infamous comments following the deadly Charlottesville rally. We all remember that. I want to remind people, though, here's what Trump had to say back then, and then also what Biden had to say just a couple of days ago. Take a look.
Excuse me, they didn't let themselves down, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Mr. President, what's your message to the protesters? Do you condemn the anti-Semitic protests on college campuses?
I condemn the anti-Semitic protests. That's why I've set up a program to deal with that. I also condemn those who don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians.
So, Professor Dershowitz, I mean, is that really the same thing?
No, it's worse. How dare he compare me? I don't believe what's happening to the Palestinians is the fault of Israel. I believe it's the fault of Hamas. I believe that the Hamas is the ones that are starving the Palestinians, using them as human shields. And don't compare me to anti-Semites. We're not in the same group. Nobody can justify what happened on October 7th, but people can justify saying, well, you know, the Palestinians, they made their bed, they voted for Hamas, 80% of the Palestinians in the Gaza, 70% in the West Bank, or vice versa, support what happened on October 7th. No, I shed tears for babies. I shed tears for totally innocent people. I do not shed any tears for the parents who spoke to their son while he was killing 10 Jews, and the parents say, oh, we're so proud of you, we wish you were there. I don't shed any tears for the Hamas, for the Gaza civilians who followed Hamas into Israel and raped and murdered people even though they were civilians. I shed tears for the few, relatively few, innocent civilians who have been killed, but not for the many, many, many complicit Gazans who have been killed largely
relatively few.
But I want to get back to what
34,000,
fewer than in any country. No,
but hold it. In fairness, this started. No, hold it. You made the point. You made your point.
Very few.
I have to make a point. I have to make. You wrote your article, and Brian started this segment comparing what Trump said about big good people on both sides to what Biden said, trying to wordplay, catch Biden in being equivocal in something he should be determined. I submit that is nothing but wordplay.
Well, and that was the whole point of Professor Dershowitz's opinion piece. But Geraldo, I want to ask Geraldo, why can't President Biden just say we stand with Israel? Why does he have to go on?
President Biden didn't have to say it.
Or we stand against anti-Semitism. Or we stand against anti-Semitism.
Why is there always that little caveat?
May I answer? May I answer?
Geraldo, you can
May I answer?
Yes, please.
Joe Biden on Air Force One, 2 days after October 7th, arrived with the promise that the United States stands with you, Israel. Here I am, the American president. I am here, despite all of the controversy, hospital been bombed or something. I forget exactly what had happened in Gaza.
That was great.
There was Joe Biden. I have never voted for Joe Biden. I may never vote for Joe Biden.
I have.
But Joe Biden was there for Israel, and today he allowed $26 billion worth of aid to go to Israel. So what do you want? You want the rhetorician, or do you want the one who says this is that bull.
We're going to have to leave it.
Whatever. I can't say it without cursing.
I want both. I want both. I want the bully pulpit president to stand up and say, I condemn anti-Semitism. I condemn students who support Hamas. I condemn presidents of universities who tolerate the support for Hamas. They should at least condemn it. I support the First Amendment, but I'm telling you that people slide from advocacy of terrorism into terrorism. Mark my words and put me back on a year from now when we'll all be worrying about how much terrorism is coming to the United States if Hamas is not destroyed.
Well, it was a healthy debate. Professor Alan Dershowitz, Geraldo Rivera, it was an honor having you both on.
I love you, Geraldo.
It was
we
an
can
honor.
disagree, but I love you.
I mean, that's the beauty of it. That's why NewsNation is so great. Thank you both for coming on. We appreciate it. Okay, this break is 4 minutes, 5 seconds. Coming up, deadly new details in the case of the two murdered Kansas moms. A fifth man has been arrested. Who is he? What part did he play? Plus, we have got exclusive new information on how exactly these two women were killed, and it is not what was originally reported. We've got that coming up next. In the case of the two Kansas moms, Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly, who were murdered while on their way to pick up Butler's two kids in a custody visit that turned deadly. We've been covering this one for weeks. Veronica had been in this nasty custody battle with the paternal grandmother of her children, Tiffany Adams, who was arrested on April 13th, along with three others. The group, known to call themselves as God's Misfits. Well, today, a fifth suspect in connection with the murders, this man you see right here, was also now arrested. 31-year-old. He's a father of three. Paul Grice is his name. And we're told that he confessed to police yesterday that he was involved in the planning, the killing, and the burying of the moms. Also, I have some exclusive new information on how the women were murdered. I want to bring in NewsNation national security contributor, retired FBI special agent, Tracy Walder. Tracy, it's always good to see you. First thing I want to ask you, I thought it was interesting with Paul Grice, the fifth arrest now. Police are saying that he also confessed, that they went out and interviewed him yesterday, and that he confessed to his involvement. Grandma Tiffany apparently also confessed. Why do you think they're all confessing? I mean, a lot of times you'd think they'd just stay silent.
So that's a great question, Brian. It's good to see you. I think a lot of this really goes back to that God's Misfit affiliation, and that has to do with being sovereign citizens. And they feel that what they did needed to be done and was necessary because they don't trust the government. They don't believe in the government. Therefore, they needed to intervene. I'm not saying that's right, but I think that's where their mind's at in regards to these confessions.
The other new information we're able to confirm now, Tracy, is that the two victims were not shot. We don't know the exact cause of death or how they died, but we did confirm through the medical examiner that they were not shot. What do you make of that? Because when I first heard that, I don't know, my heart went out to, I'm just thinking, I think it might have been a very, very brutal killing. You're kind of hoping if they were shot, it was quick and painless.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And that was something that I talked about with Dan Abrams a week or two ago, kind of really discussing why it took so long, quite frankly, to identify their bodies. And I want to be sensitive about this, but there's rumors, I don't know if it's true or not, that there was a broken hammer at the scene. And if that is the case, then it sounds perhaps they were bludgeoned to death. And that takes time to really figure out identifications with dental records. And so that's what I felt all along, is that they were not shot. They were beaten in some way, which is absolutely horrific. Yeah,
and we've also reported that there were large puddles of blood at the scene where the car was discovered, and that there was also blood inside the car. So it's looking more and more like it was really just a brutal, brutal murder. I want to take you inside the mind of this new suspect, though, Paul Grice. And you mentioned God's Misfits, this anti-government religious cult group they were a part of. We managed to get our hands on a land record that Paul filed last summer. This was a public document. And I want to read you part of it, Tracy, because it gives you an idea of what he thought and believed and what kind of person he was. It says, "I repudiate and revoke my citizenship, if any ever existed, with the legal fiction known as the United States government. I claim my children as my God-given property and subject to none other. Government did not create my children and therefore does not control my children. God created my children in their mother's womb with my sperm and are my creation, my property, and I waive none of my God-given rights or duties in the upbringing of my offspring. So this is something that this fifth suspect filed as part of a land record, but I guess this just goes back to the God's Misfits group. It kind of shows you what these folks were believing.
Right. And so what really the key where there's that legal fiction, that's how they view society. It exists not in real life. It is just simply a construct that was made by someone that they don't have to answer to. And that's really kind of what the sovereign citizens are about too, although I know it's kind of two separate groups that we're looking at here. And as a result, they have a tendency to take the law into their own hands. And I think in this case, they believed every step of the way that the legal system was taking these kids from them, and they needed to get these kids back because those kids were their property and belonged to them in this sort of world simulation.
Wow, just disturbing. You saw the 5 suspects now. There's now 5 suspects. I mentioned that Grandma Tiffany confessed early on in a recorded statement. Do you think that she's the mastermind from what we know behind this whole thing. Do you think she's trying to work a deal behind the scenes? Because the death penalty could be on the table to avoid the death penalty. Is she the reason that they figured out that Paul Grice had enough involvement to be arrested? You think she's talking to them right now behind the scenes?
Yes and no. So you have to remember, this is a group that doesn't like the government. So I actually am thinking that they're not being compliant with the government, quite frankly, because they don't trust them, they don't believe in them, and they don't think they have any power over them. So I would be, and I could be surprised, right, that she's just rolling over and admitting everything and turning suspects over. I think this came from the 16-year-old daughter, and they were trying to track him down. And my guess is it was difficult to track him down, and that's why this took a bit longer. But I'm not sure that any of them are flipping on each other yet, simply because of their mistrust of the government and the legal system.
Yeah, and I was out there, Tracy, talking to a number of people. Everybody knows everybody out there, and heard the same thing over and over again when it came to Grandma Tiffany and her boyfriend Tad, that people were intimidated by them, got a bad vibe many times. But in terms of Paul Grice, the 5th suspect, we heard a lot of really nice things, that he was a family man, that he was a hard worker, that they didn't really think he was involved. So the community seems to be really shocked by this, Tracy.
I mean, look, it's hard to sometimes know what someone's doing behind closed doors, right? And if this is someone that did share that core ideology, he may not have been an aggressive person. He may not have been a violent person. But when it comes to children, and again, he stated in that statement, they are his property and his property alone, they will do violent things. Any
chance you think that there could be more suspects involved? Because they've said it's an open investigation, so...
You know, in my opinion, no. I don't know that there's going to be any suspects directly involved in the murders themselves, but there may be other kind of co-conspirators that may come out as a result of this. But I think the main murder suspects, those who participated in the deaths, are in custody now.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it's now 5 behind bars, this God Misfits component, I think we're going to learn a lot more in the coming weeks. We've got a hearing coming up on May 15th. They're all in the process of hiring private attorneys. So I think we're going to get a lot more details because the arrest affidavits so far really haven't had a ton of detail. So I think this is going to continue to shock all of us. Tracy Walder, thank you so much for coming on. It's always nice to see you.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
Okay, this next break, it's 4 minutes. 30 seconds. Up next, last year, a Nashville school shooter killed 3 young children and 3 staff members. But is the answer to put guns in the hands of teachers? Well, today, Tennessee lawmakers, they passed a bill that allows teachers to have concealed weapons in public schools. So would this make you feel that your kids are safer at school, or do you think the guns have no place in the classroom? We're going to debate it. That's coming up next. Faculty members. And the bill's proponents say that this law could have avoided the school shooting. But opponents say that arming teachers will only lead to more gun deaths. Last year, there were nearly 350 school shootings. So will this new law actually make schools safer? I want to bring in Tennessee conservative talk radio show host Ben Ferguson and also former Democratic Ohio State Senator Nina Turner. Ben and Nina, it's nice to see you both. You know, Ben, when I first read about this new lie, I immediately thought back to the school shooting in Nashville. And I was wondering, do you think if this bill had been passed earlier, it actually could have made a difference, Ben?
It certainly could have. We do know for a fact that shooter was looking at another target and decided not to go at that other school because they had armed guards that were publicly known at that school. So we know from what she had written that she chose the school because she knew that there was no one there that was armed. Look, I've been a victim of a gun crime. I had a gun put to my head and had to shoot back to save my life. I grew up in a law enforcement family. And I can tell you, as much as I love law enforcement, my father is in law enforcement, I can tell you they cannot be there when a school shooting happens. We are seeing a rise in school shootings, unfortunately, and it's because it's a gun-free zone. And people that come in know they have an unlimited amount of time to shoot until they either decide to take their own life or until law enforcement gets there and they can create carnage and take out these kids. And look, let's be clear about this law. And I advocated and worked hard for this law to be passed. I've been working on this law for a long time and advocating for it. It only is teachers that want to sign up. This is not mandated. Many teachers are former law enforcement or former military. Many staffers and coaches are former law enforcement, former military, and they have to go through 40 hours of training. So I would never want to put a gun in the hands of a teacher that doesn't want to have one. But even if there's 2 or 3 per school that sign up and do this, they're willing to risk their lives. We see the heroes every time out of these shootings. The last thing I'll say quickly, it's always teachers that give up their lives to try to save their kids' lives, whether it's barricading themselves or fighting the attacker or trying to take out the attacker. We see it on the videos in these classrooms and in the hallways. Why would we not trust those people with a gun to take out these shooters or try to save the lives of kids? This is a common sense approach, and I support it 100%.
Well, and you make the point that they're not just handing out guns to teachers. There's a whole list of things that the teachers have to do.
Extensive training.
Yeah, it's enhanced. They have to get an enhanced carry permit, approval from the superintendent and chief of police, 80 hours of additional training. There's a background check. There's a psychological check. Nina, if they do all of those things, why is this such a bad thing?
This is an illusion, and it's on the cheap. It does not solve the problem. I, too, come from a law enforcement family. And if the state of Tennessee really cared about the children in those schools and truly cared about their safety, then they would invest the requisite tax dollars to ensure that there were professional law enforcement officers at each and every one of those schools. Why put the burden on teachers who have a hard enough job to teach? Now you want them to shoot it out at the OK Corral. It's not a burden if they're signing up. Now you want them to shoot it out at the OK Corral. I didn't interrupt you. Don't you interrupt me. I've talked to teachers both in my state of Ohio and teachers across the country. They don't like this. The majority of teachers do not like this. And as a matter of fact, some of the parents who had children in the Covenant School at the time of that shooting came to the legislature and let them know they did not like this bill. One parent in particular said that if their teacher was armed and decided that they wanted to go out and try to seek the shooter, what would the students in the classroom, these 9-year-olds, do there all by themselves? Don't put that burden on the teachers. Another point is this. Every time there's a shooting like this, the GOP want to say it's not the guns, it's mental health. Well, what in Tennessee is being done to deal with mental health crises? What are you doing to ensure that every single Tennessean has health care? As a matter of fact, you're not doing much of anything to ensure that.
Again, you have no idea what you're talking about.
This is
let me jump back in here.
Nina made a fair point. I mean, they've surveyed teachers, and in many cases, the majority of them are against this. They're not comfortable with it. If they're the ones who have to work in the schools, do you think the teacher's opinion on it should matter?
I go back to what I said earlier. The majority of teachers don't need to carry a gun. And if you don't want to carry a gun, you don't have to. That's why it's not mandatory. It's voluntary. Second thing, she got it completely wrong, and she obviously doesn't know what's going on in Tennessee, and she just lied to everyone looking. There was massive money that was passed for mental health in Tennessee. So if you would have done some research instead of just putting out fake lines, you would have known this. You would have known this. So let me finish. Again, Let me finish what I was saying. You talked about mental health, and you didn't know what you were talking about.
I'll let you have the last word, Nina, but you finish, Ben. Yeah.
Let me also say this. When she says this is on the cheap, I would say talk to parents, because I have, who have lost kids in school shootings. I've talked to them, and they said the same thing. They wish there was someone there that could have instantly reacted to a shooter. And many times it is a deterrent. I'm, by the way, in favor and have advocated for there to be resource officers at every single school. I think in America, this is not hard. We should have resource officers at every school. We value our kids, we protect them, and we should give them that protection. But at the end of the day, if there is former law enforcement or a teacher that's willing to go through 80 hours of training, and it doesn't stop there, you have to basically keep up with with that requirement, and you have to keep going through training afterwards so that you're proficient. That individual should be able to save the lives of kids in school. And if you're a teacher and you don't want to do that, then you should not be forced to. And this law allows the majority of teachers to say no, and a couple of heroes that want to do this to say yes. I would want a teacher that went through this training protecting my 3 boys.
Yeah.
And I would want to make sure they're not having to wait 5, 8, 10, 11, 12, 15 minutes for law enforcement to show up where we're then counting bodies afterwards.
Well, there is an interesting component to this that opponents are concerned about. They're worried that parents don't get to know which teachers actually have the guns. That part of it is confidential. Exactly right. So your kid's teacher could be one of the ones with the gun, and you don't even get to know. Nina, you get the last word.
Right. And it's wrong. Again, it is on the cheap. And for him to sit up here and try to malign my integrity is wrong. I let him say what he had to say. Don't go low, baby, because I will go lower. This is the bottom line here, is that this is no way to put this kind of burden on teachers. If the state of Tennessee or any other states that are led by GOP who pass these bills as an illusion of protection, this does not protect children. If they really care deeply about children, as we all should, then hire the professionals, make sure that they are there, and put the money in the budget to do so, and do not, under any circumstances, put this burden on the teachers. This is not the wild, wild west, and teachers should not have that burden on their backs to have to teach children and also protect them from a shooter as well.
I think we just lost Ben Ferguson to a technical issue, if you're wondering why he just disappeared. But we, of course, appreciate his perspective.
I don't know about that. I think he was running scared. I don't know if it was technical.
You were getting a little too hot for maybe. No. It was a technical difficulty. But again, we appreciate his perspective. Of course, we appreciate your perspective, Nina Turner, and we really appreciate you coming on tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, this break right now, 3 minutes, 45 seconds. Up next, if you're like me, and I actually do, I know a lot of people have started taking the drug Adderall. It's getting very, very popular. And a lot of them are young people. Now the DEA says Adderall, often used to treat attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity, it could actually be the next opioid crisis. Why is it being prescribed to 30% more since the pandemic? We've got Dr. Drew Pinsky. He's going to join me live. We're going to talk about it next. More than 100,000 Americans died of drug overdoses, mostly from opioids. But one of the DEA's top officials is now sounding the alarm about the next drug crisis, the ADHD medication Adderall. According to the DEA, the spike in stimulant abuse is due to the rise of telehealth companies during the pandemic. Telehealth providers are reportedly rubber stamping Adderall prescriptions, really without any due diligence at all. And while Adderall overdoses are rare, the consequences of the addiction can be very, very severe. Joining me now, the Chief Patient Officer for the wellness company, Dr. Drew Pinsky. Dr. Drew, it's always nice to see you. You know, when I read this from the DEA, I thought about friends that I have that just in the last couple of years have been talking about how they started taking Adderall. Oh, it helps me focus at work. I just called the doctor. It was very, very easy to get. I can work all night long on my projects. What's the issue with that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very complicated landscape. This drug is not to be taken for performance. In fact, it's odd to me that universities don't address it as cheating. It's not. It's a psychotropic medication. It is a serious brain medication for specifically fully diagnosed conditions. Very few people are ever formally diagnosed, and even those that are formally diagnosed I'm not convinced that many of those in adulthood should be on Adderall. We actually have a shortage of Adderall now. So much of it is being prescribed. And, of course, a lot of this is the aftermath of the lockdowns. I was saying at the beginning of the lockdowns, we are going to destroy 8 to 15-year-olds when that period of development, when their cognitive development, the window for that development is so critical, and they are so dependent on their peers for their well-being. And then, by the way, we told them, hide under your bed, shelter in place. Right. If you don't do that, you're going to kill your family. Of course we cause mood problems, anxiety. But Adderall is not for those problems. So why are we seeing this widespread use of this medication? You might be putting your finger on it a little bit with these sort of rubber stamping in sort of various settings, frankly. But look, the reality is there are many people with ADHD that can be treated by a variety of substances, not necessarily with a psychostimulant. And I don't think you're going to see something like the opioid crisis with this. People aren't aware. People put all the blame on the drug companies. But the fact is the way that thing rolled out was first doctors were criminally prosecuted for inadequate treatment of pain. When that started happening, doctors froze, sent everything to the pain specialist. The pain specialist became evangelist for pain is the fifth vital sign. No patient should ever experience pain in the United States. Pain is whatever the patient says it is, and it was on after that. And so, look, you have to have evangelical physicians. You have to have a distribution system. On top of that, opioid overdose, when combined with the benzodiazepine, is very common. Adderall, it's not an overdose medication, but you can trigger manias, you can trigger psychosis, you can trigger depression's coming off it, and you certainly can make addictions worse or even trigger addiction.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, if they say that Adderall, there's not a ton of overdoses, if you're just using it, again, like some of the people I know have talked about, I've got a really big presentation tomorrow for work, or I got to stay up all night studying. Why is it dangerous?
Like I said, look, it does work. This is the problem. It actually does improve performance. It's cheating, let's be clear. And when you're using a medication for a specific therapeutic purpose and using it for other than what it is designed, you are only putting yourself in harm's way. And the three big things is triggering a mania, triggering a depression on the other side, triggering or worsening addiction. It happens a lot.
How do you get off it, Dr. Drew?
Well, look, the generic name is dextroamphetamine. It is a psychostimulant. It is very close related to methamphetamine. And the stimulants don't have a withdrawal the way the opioids have withdrawal. There's not much tolerance to them. There's not a withdrawal syndrome. There is a reaction when you take this stimulant off the brain. You might be somnolent, you might be depressed, you might have cravings for other substances. I mean, there's a protein reaction to this. Might be unable to drive a car all of a sudden and not understand that you're, having this somnolent reaction. But it's not a withdrawal per se so much as a reaction. That's provided that you didn't have some sort of bad reaction to it when you were on it, such as a manic episode. Yeah, that will persist even after you come off.
Well, yeah, you mentioned when you're on it, can it make you more angry, tantrums, grumpy, that kind of thing?
Sure. Well, coming off the grumpiness, but yeah, when you're on it, people get irritable, they get grandiose, they can make bad choices. And again, when you're using a psychopharmacological agent, something that really significantly affects brain chemistry for something other than for which it is intended, you are only going to put yourself in harm's way. It's not it does improve performance. It's not a performance-enhancing drug. Again, I put some of the blame at the school system because the schools never call it out for what it is. It's drug abuse and it's cheating. And it should be treated as any other kind of cheating.
So who should be taking it? I mean, who would be a good candidate where it is the right move?
It's under the age of 18. We have a very strange relationship with psychotropic medication in this country. We it's overused and underused. People that need psychotropic medications aren't often getting access to them. We have a deficient number of. Some states are profoundly deficient in psychiatrists, and we have a tendency to give it sort of. Primary care doctors, pediatricians tend to hand out psychotropic medications without proper formal assessment. It is designed and shown clearly to be beneficial in people formally diagnosed with ADD, ADHD under the age of 18. After the age of 18, it gets a little bit more confusing. I will tell you, In my world, all my patients, all addicts, have some form of ADD, ADHD. And if you give them a psychostimulant, you are not helping them. You're not making them better, particularly a dextroamphetamine.
It just feels like we're in this time, Dr. Drew, where you want to lose some weight, you find a doctor who will prescribe you Ozempic, you want to stay up and concentrate and get your promotion, you get some Adderall. That just seems to be the vibe right now.
So, well, you're putting your finger on something terribly important. This is a little bit of a sidestep, what we were just talking about. My father was a family practitioner, old-fashioned. He never, when I was growing up, he never allowed me to take medication. I remember the first time I took an antibiotic, I was like 14 or 15. And I remember the moment. He pulled out some samples, and it was my pediatrician that was mandating. He was like, all right, he wants you to take it. Here we go. You're crossing a threshold now. We are taking ampicillin. It's a big moment. And he hammered into my head that medications are dangerous, and they're only when they're worth the risk, when they're precisely properly used in an appropriate diagnostic situation where it's worth it.
Yeah, it's a good point. Dr. Drew Pinsky, it's always nice to see you. Thanks so much for coming on.
You as well.
Okay, we'll be right back after this. Cuomo's podcast, The Chris Cuomo Project, just dropped, featuring an interview with groundbreaking MMA star Ronda Rousey. Chris and Rousey covered many topics, but here is what she said to say about why she quit. Here's what she had to say about why she quit fighting, and also her relationship with her former friend and colleague, Joe Rogan. Take a look at this.
What was it like for you to have people doing all this guessing about whether it was fear or you'd lost your heart or that the game had caught up to you and there were just different skill sets around you that you couldn't compete with anymore? And you wanted to say this, that this is not what it is.
It was really disappointing just to see how happily everybody had turned on me, and how, people like Joe Rogan, who were crying in the ring out of the honor of being able to call my fights, had people I considered friends in the media so quickly, turned on me.
Have you heard from any of your old friends? Have they, whether it's, a name like Rogan or just people who you thought were your friends that many people don't know, have people reached out to you?
Not a single person has called me or anything like that. They've all just doubled down and said that I'm making excuses or lying or blowing things out of proportion or not giving credit where it's due or, no, I have not. I'll be waiting for that call forever.
Oh, man, who doesn't love Ronda Rousey? Okay, you can find the Chris Cuomo Project anywhere that you get your podcast. That is all the time we have for tonight. It's been fun filling in. I actually borrowed Chris's tie. He doesn't know it, but it's my lucky tie tonight. Dan Abrams starts right now.